The tides are shifting in North America. For the past 5 or 10 years, we have been dealing with insanely over progressive rules, insanely over progressive politicians, and all of that is kind of coming to an end right now. In Canada, you have the premiers, which it would be the equivalent of governors of different states in America. They're standing up to Justin Trudeau, which is very bizarre because even though there are some opposition premiers like Danielle Smith, right? She's for the Conservatives, Justin Trudeau's for the Liberal Party. They have butted heads since the beginning. Other premiers, such as ones on the East Coast, are inherently liberal, and they're finally standing up to Justin Trudeau and the federal Liberal parties. And it seems like there's this moment of solidarity within the premiers to work together, and I don't want to say to have a coup of the federal government, but Canadians' version of a coup. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I want to encourage you all to smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It does really help grow the channel. We are looking at quite a few things about here in Canada. Danielle Smith just did a crazy interview with Dr. Jordan Peterson, and then we also have some updates out of America. So let's just jump right into it here. You got the polls. Conservatives are sitting at 214 projected seats. Bottom line 179, top end of 234, with the Liberals at 71. Not looking good there at all. And it's still 99% across the board for odds of winning the most seats and odds of a majority government. So everything is looking just as it should for the Conservative Party of Canada. Now, here's where things get interesting. Elon Musk, in the past week since Donald Trump's failed assassination attempt, has come out and said he pledges $45 or $50 million, something like that, per month for campaigns until the election is had, right? So that's 150, 180 million, something along those lines. That's a lot of money. Now, there's obviously been some controversy to that because people are going, how can a billionaire support a presidential candidate? But they're forgetting in the past how Mark Zuckerberg, who runs Facebook and Meta and Threads, whatever is left of it, he has donated to the Joe Biden campaign. He's been openly supportive of the Democrats, and he's openly admitted on a Joe Rogan podcast within the last couple of years that they were forced to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop issue and pretty much everything and anything that made Joe Biden look bad in the media, which is absolutely insane. And to have to admit that takes quite a bit of balls, because then the people, well, they turn out to they hate you for that, right? But here's where it gets really interesting is he's just come out and said, well, not directly, but indirectly, it seems like he might be hinting that he supports Trump now, which is very bizarre. So let's take a look at the lizard robot here.
I've done some stuff personally in the past. I'm not planning on doing that this time. And that includes, not endorsing either of the candidates. Now, look, there's obviously a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. The historic events over the last, over the weekend. And on a personal note, it's, seeing Donald Trump get up after getting shot in the face and pump his fist in the air with the American flag is one of the most badass things I've ever seen in my life. But look, it's, and I think, look, it's, at some level as an American, it's like hard to not get kind of emotional about that spirit and that fight. And I think that's why a lot of people like the guy.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting that Mark Zuckerberg's come out of the woodworks now because of all the things, like I said. He's been very much supportive of Joe Biden and been anti-Trump. But a little known fact about Mark Zuckerberg is he's a huge MMA fan. He loves combat sports. He loves UFC. He shows up to a lot of the UFCs. And Donald Trump shows up as well. And there's a crowd of UFC fans. There's a crowd, right? And if that's the case, it seems like Mark Zuckerberg is getting a little bit out of the democratic mindset and a little bit more into, embracing the fact that he's a man. So good job, Mark Zuckerberg, for finally growing a pair. Now we're taking a look at Justin Trudeau, who has not yet grown a pair. In fact, he's gone completely the opposite way, where he's making Canadian military DEI. That's right. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is inherently sexist and racist because it makes sure that people are not hired on the merit of their work. You're not hired for a job because of your resume, your qualifications. You're hired because of the color of your skin, or if you're a woman. Very, very bizarre. And this is kind of historic, and not in the way that CBC says, because they're saying Trudeau marks historic appointment of General Jenny Karenine as first female chief of defense staff. It's more historic in the sense that we just saw like the head of the FBI royally fuck up and almost let President Donald Trump, former president and soon to be next president, at one of his rallies get assassinated because of lack of incompetence. The roof was too sloped, according to the FBI. A woman. But yeah, sure. What could go wrong from allowing this in Canada?
General Carignan, in an interview last year, you pointed out that as an engineer, you can predict to a certain extent how a system might react based on science and evidence and models. But over the course of your career, including in operations in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Golan Heights, and Afghanistan, you also learned that there is no perfect model to predict the outcomes of wars, global instability, and human tragedy. You've demonstrated time and time again the ability to lead with both strength and flexibility. In Afghanistan, you were deployed to head the Task Force Kandahar Engineer Regiment. In Iraq, you led NATO Mission Iraq to help strengthen Iraqi security institutions and forces to fight terrorism and stabilize the country. General Carignan, you were the first woman in Canadian Armed Forces history to command a combat arms unit. Now you...
There's no doubt in my mind that this individual isn't a decorated member of the military. That's fine, right? The issue is that you're now representing Canada as the chief of defense staff, and it's because you're a woman. Let's just be honest. That's why Trudeau did that. He prides himself on the fact that the Liberal cabinet is 50% women. Now, women, should they have jobs like this? That's kind of the controversy. There's a time and there's a place, and not being able to admit that is inherently the problem as to why we got here in the first place, where DEI is allowed. They're going to combat sexism with sexism policies. Come on, that's just, anyone with a brain can see that there's an issue with that. But let's take a look at what she's saying as our threat, our biggest threat, Russia and China. And we got 5 years to prepare.
Your predecessor, Wayne Eyre, talked about Canadians living in a more dangerous world than most of us have ever seen in our lifetime. I'd like to ask you about your thoughts on that. And particularly, do you see there's a serious risk that Canada will be drawn into an actual conflict in the next 5 to 10 years?
Like many Canadians, we feel safe in Canada. We have historically. We have a great friend to our south. We have big oceans. We had a very deep frozen Arctic. And that has historically shielded us well from many threats. Not so much anymore. There are weapon systems that can reach the continent right now. The north is thawing, so we are much more open now to both conventional threats and unconventional threats all at the same time. So I think Canadians need to understand that if we are not ready, we might not be able to react appropriately in defense of them. Do I have a timeline? I have a bit of a timeline. I say we have about 5 years to get us close enough to be ready to counter those long-range type of threat. And then we are actively working with the NORAD, our NORAD friends, and our NATO allies to get ready for that.
I think one of our biggest threats is lack of competency within our own ranks and not hiring people based off of, their work ethic and their qualifications, but hiring people based off of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That seems to be the biggest threat in North America, here in Canada, and you're seeing it kind of get phased out quite a bit in America, especially yesterday with Donald Trump's speech. I don't know if you caught that. I do have a clip pulled up for the end of this video about that speech, but there was one thing that he said that just was incredible and got the whole crowd going. There will be, I can't do an impression of him. There will be no more men playing in women's sports. And I don't think you're going to see any Canadian elected politician be able to actually say that. That's kind of the difference between America and Canada. Look, I like Pierre, I like the Conservative Party, but that is one step of, that's a massive leap that just Canada hasn't taken, and we're waiting for that to happen here in Canada, because if we don't, you're going to see more of this. The Chief of Defense Staff, Jenny, I don't know, man. We just seen the FBI fail, right? And that's in America. I don't know if Canada really is going to be, it's different this time because it's in Canada. Yeah, I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments. You know what? Let's leave that discussion for the community. You guys battle it out down below. If you think that that she's very qualified for the job, let me know your points. And if you think that maybe the Chief of Defense Staff is not qualified and this was a diversity hire, let me know what you guys think down below. Now, one of the next biggest talking points here in Canada, is going to be this cabinet retreat, the Liberal cabinet retreat that happens at the end of August on the East Coast, who to be the bad guy. And everybody is speculating, just like last year, that there's going to be the cabinet shuffle before they do that retreat so that they can use that retreat for some bonding and try to re-strategize their plan. And that's not me saying it. That's the Hill Times right here. Trudeau expected to shuffle his cabinet before retreat, say Liberal sources. The Liberal Party so far has nominated 99 out of 155 incumbent Liberal MPs for the next election. Prior to every cabinet shuffle, Prime Ministers check their ministers and MPs on who is running again. Prime Minister Trudeau has reportedly been in talks with former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney. Trudeau is expected to shuffle his cabinet prior to the August 25 to 27 cabinet retreat in Halifax. That is going to be insane if he does. And there's obviously a lot of reasons to believe that, Chrystia Freeland is going to be shuffled out, right? That's been a massive talking point for quite some time now. And to be honest, if they're talking about bringing Carney in, it's going to be on the financial side. The finance minister. That's Chrystia Freeland's current position, which is really crazy because she's been so loyal to Justin Trudeau, like a sinking ship, and she's staying on as, the captain's right-hand person. She has not abandoned Trudeau. He's not said anything bad about Trudeau, yet he is prepared to throw her under the bus to try to save his party, when the reality is, I'm going to use their own words, the reality is here that the only way to save the party is if Trudeau steps out of the way, and literally lets anybody else try to assume command of that party. But that's enough about what I think about that. Let's hear what the premiers have to say, because this is where the premiers are ganging up together and going and taking on Justin Trudeau.
We were the lowest in inflation rate when we didn't have our fuel tax on either. We went for 2 years with a reprieve on the fuel tax, costing our Treasury $2 billion. I believe you see it now, this with the reprieve on fuel tax in Manitoba, lowest inflation rate, and I believe as well with the reprieve on the fuel tax on home heating in Saskatchewan, they also have a low inflation rate. I mean, now we have 3 cases right there that reducing the cost of living can be directly tied to the cost of base fuels. And the federal government, there's only so much provinces can do. The federal government has greater means. We can't keep cutting our own sources of revenue because the federal government refuses to cut theirs. All of us use our fuel taxes for upgrading roads, and that becomes a major priority, especially since they didn't come through with transportation infrastructure in this last budget. So I think it's pretty clear that if they wanted to make an immediate difference, they would recognize the knock-on costs that the carbon tax is having on transportation of everything, on food costs, on heating costs for retail stores and everything we purchase. And that's part of the reason why we're having such a difficult time keeping the inflation rate low. So it's up to the federal government now, I believe, to give us a fuel tax break. We've been advocating in Alberta to cut the tax, and we think that it's demonstrated that will have an immediate impact.
So somebody is, bringing all of the premiers together and finding common ground. And the one who's doing that is Danielle Smith. So much so that she has allowed for a interview with Dr. Jordan Peterson, which is what we're going to take a look at today.
But one of the things that I have heard as I've gone out talking about the value proposition that Alberta has to offer is I'm told that if we don't provide that secure supply of LNG so that they can be using it for their energy needs, they're actually quite worried in places like the Asian countries and in India, that if we can't provide them with whether it's ammonia or LNG or some kind of hydrogen carrier, that they're just going to have to keep on developing coal-fired plants.
Of course they will. Of course.
And
Well, and coal has advantages. You can stockpile coal like mad. All you have to do is put it in a pile. It's pretty straightforward. And so, of course, they're going to turn to coal. Why? Because there's absolutely no way that these developing countries, where most of the people are going to be able to withstand the pressure from the population with regards to the necessity of economic growth. And so, and we already saw this, Premier Smith. We saw this in Germany. The Germans took this demented tilt towards green environmentalism, and all that's happened is that their electricity is 5 times as expensive as it should have been, and they pollute more. Not least because they have to burn lignite. That's how it's turned out. Lignite, for God's sake, the most polluting form of coal. They shut their nuclear power plants down, which was utterly insane. And so what's happened in Germany is they're more dependent on, like Putin, for example. Their energy costs have spiraled out of control. They're deindustrializing as a consequence, and they pollute more. So, the only way that's a victory is if all you wanted to do to begin with was cause as much havoc and disruption as possible.
It's funny you should say that, because one of my MLAs in the legislature, and just listening at what our opponents in the New Democratic Party have to say, he came up with this formula that the progressives have, is that they identify a problem and then they identify a solution that will make things worse. And then they criticize conservatives who have solutions that are actually a lot more practical and may work, and try to demonize the solutions that we take. But
I'm actually going to one-up you on that one, Premier. What the NDP and the Liberals do is they cause the problem either through incompetence, because they want to on purpose, right? Or because they're just absolute morons. And then they offer to sell the solution when it comes closer to re-election, or the potential for re-election, like a campaign, right? Like we're going into right now. And this is insane, because Justin Trudeau is promising things that he promised 9 years ago. Indigenous communities, for example, are completely left behind in the shadows, right? Justin Trudeau has yet to actually visit and step foot on any single treated piece of land in Canada, which is why at one of the recent conventions, the AFN convention or something of the sorts, you had a Indigenous leader get up and say to the Liberal minister, but also indirectly to Justin Trudeau, you don't have the balls to come to our land, because that's all the government has been doing, is saying they're going to give handouts. They give a little bit of money, but they don't actually go to the land and talk to the people. It's all photo ops. And for some reason, they've been trying to pander. The government has been trying to pander to specifically Indigenous communities. But I mean, the time has come now where it's just so ridiculously outdated, right? They've had 9 years to do something, literally anything, and they haven't even done a single freaking thing. That's one of many examples, right? I could go on and on about communities that aren't Indigenous, but we don't have time for that in this video. So there you go, Premier Danielle Smith. The Liberals and the NDP, they don't just offer solutions that are crappier than what the Conservatives are doing. They actually cause some of the problems and then offer the solutions when it comes time to vote again.
You're absolutely right. Is that there's this maybe it's sort of a it's plausible that the approach that they would take would work. It's plausible that if you built out an economy based on nothing but wind and solar and batteries, that everybody would have free electricity and it would drive prices down and it would be unlimited because the wind is always blowing somewhere and the sun is always shining somewhere. And if you just interconnected enough, then it should work. And I think that that plausible lie has been at the heart of why it is we've had such dysfunctional policy around how we develop our energy sector. You need to have.
So as someone who lived in a van for 4 years and my entire life was powered by solar. My entire life. I put solar panels on my roof. I brought that down into a charge controller, into an inverter, over to the batteries, right? And I had fridge, freezer, lights, any computer, any technology, a coffee maker for a house, right? Like a drip coffee maker. All of these things I had powered by solar in my vehicle, in my home on wheels. And I chased the sun, right? If I didn't have sun somewhere, I could just move and park somewhere else, unlike a fixed home, right? So there's those benefits, so many pros and cons to both different lifestyles. But I did that for full time for 4 years. And I'm a huge fan of solar, huge, like one of the biggest fans of solar power and lithium ion batteries. That was an insanely fun and rewarding experience to go through. But we do live in Canada and it's just not sustainable to run everything off of solar. Like the things that I had were so minimal compared to what you would have for a house. I couldn't run an air conditioner. There are 12 volt ACs that you can run, but it would suck up all the battery and I would be literally chasing the sun, like chasing battery power day after day after day. And I had an insane amount of battery powers, right? Absolutely insane. And so this is what people in suits and ties just aren't understanding, is this logic here that we could just make that switch instantly here in Canada to everything off of powered by solar and wind and battery powered, right? And I get it. I have limited space on the roof of a van, limited amount of battery capacity, but it's just so expensive. It's so expensive and it takes up so much space that you would have literally fields. You would have to have fields and fields and fields. So much of our undeveloped land would now have to be like solar farms and stuff, which would be horrible. And that is like worse than any pollution anyone's doing right now. So kind of crazy, but I really like to see that the premier of Alberta is pushing back on this. And you did see even Donald Trump in his speech last night at the RNC push back on this and say that he's also a fan of battery and solar, but you can't force people to make that switch in a time where it just doesn't, the technology's just not there to make it worth it for everybody to switch at once.
Have reliable power. That should be number one. It should go without saying that a fuel source that only works 10% of the time in the case of sun in our market, or 30% of the time in the case of wind, is not something that you can power an industrialized economy on. And then on top of that, if you try to add everything onto the power grid so that all of your industrial use has to come from electricity, all your heating has to come from electricity, all your transportation has to come from electricity, at some point it gets absurd and gets obvious that it is unachievable. But I think that there's this aspirational approach that they put out there, that people want it to be true. And so they continue to endorse policies that are completely incapable. It's impossible to be able to implement them. And it's our job as conservatives to understand where that aspiration comes from. Because I think people are good-hearted. They actually want to have less impact on the planet. We all enjoy our beautiful outdoor spaces. And so we want to make sure that we're not doing anything that's going to impact biodiversity. So I think that there is a human need to be in touch with nature, that they're able to, I think, take advantage of, to propose policies that simply won't work. So we have to make sure we understand where that human motivation is coming from and say, look, we can achieve that a different way. And then we have to propose what that different way is. And that's what we're trying to do in Alberta.
Well, there's also a shadow side to that, just like there was a shadow side to the fossil fuel industry's presumption that if they marketed themselves in a green way, that would be a net economic advantage to them. That all presumes that the people that you're contending with are playing a fair game. And I actually don't believe that that's the case with much of the environmental nonsense. I feel that way, for example, when I go into a hotel and I see signs everywhere telling me that they're only going to do laundry every 2 days because they're saving the planet. And that isn't why they're not doing laundry. They're not doing laundry because it saves money, and fair enough. But they can cover that with this claim of environmental virtue. And so many of the people who virtue signal on the environmental side, and this is particularly true in the political realm on the left, are doing that not because they care for the environment in the least, not if it came to actually making personal sacrifices for doing something about it. They want to be seen to be the saviors of the planet without doing any of the work, any of the background work, any of the research, any of the industrial innovation that would be necessary to carry it out. They want to be seen as experts without noting, for example, well, how the hell are you going to interconnect all the world's power grids together? Where are you going to get the wire? Where are you going to get the metal? And isn't it a problem not only that wind works 10% of the time, but when it doesn't work, you have to have a parallel energy system in place. And if that's not nuclear, it has to be fossil fuels. And so then instead of having just a fossil fuel grid, let's say, for our electrified economy, you have to have a wind and a solar grid plus a fossil fuel grid. Well, how in the world could anyone with any sense whatsoever think that that constituted an improvement, especially when you also decide, let's say, to take nuclear out of the equation, which is the last thing you'd do if you actually cared about carbon dioxide production. And so for me, it's not even, there is an element of care with regards to environmental sustainability, but there's a much larger element of being seen, to be seen praying in public, to put it bluntly, to be seen virtue signaling with no effort. And so that NDP in particular are good at that.
One of my favorite things about Jordan Peterson is just the sheer fire that he has inside and this massive bone to pick with Canadian politicians. He is Canadian. He taught at the University of Toronto, and he's been thrown under the rug and dragged through the mud with his credentials, right? With things that he said on social media, and they did publicly humiliate him by trying to retraining him and things like that. I don't actually know if he did go through the retraining, but nonetheless, it turned into this massive thing, and he even talked about it on Joe Rogan. And he hates incompetent Canadian politicians, incompetent politicians in general. But when he picks on the Canadian ones, I just can't help but laugh, because not in a million years would you ever catch me trying to pick a fight with Jordan Peterson or any form of debate. That's incredible. And maybe one day we'll be lucky enough to see Dr. Jordan Peterson run in politics, and we'll have to see how the first round one goes with Pierre Poilievre, right? I do have to say that the next 4 or 5 years here in North America are going to be absolutely incredible. You're going to have Donald Trump as president, you're going to have Pierre Poilievre as prime minister, and then you're going to have a lot of people that may have flirted with politics in the past are going to come out of the woodworks and join these people. They're going to have these people join Donald Trump in America, and they're going to join Pierre in Canada. And I'd really love to see if Jordan Peterson ever does take that leap and turn, his fame, his brand, who he is, his passion and knowledge of the system, and run in politics and try and do some good. But nonetheless, first of all, I'd love to know what you guys think down below about that. But second of all, I want to take a look at this very incredible moment of Donald Trump's speech last night. For those that missed it, it's only a minute long here.
I'm not supposed to be here tonight. Not supposed to be here.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Thank you. But I'm not. And I'll tell you, I stand before you in this arena only by the grace of Almighty God. In watching the reports over the last few days, many people say it was a providential moment.
He was so inspiring. People were just holding back tears, and some people in the crowd just let them run free, because the way that Donald Trump really united the country last night was something that we haven't seen pretty much ever. And I'd love to know what you guys think down below. Chances are you've watched it, but if you have, let me know what you guys think about that talk that he gave. That's where we're going to end this video. On your way out, I would like to encourage you guys to smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't yet already. It does really help grow the channel, and we will see you in the next one. Bye for now.